Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Afsana, and you are listening to the second episode of the TCI podcast. Hope you're doing very well. So, listeners, today this podcast is all about lack of confidence and communication and how both these issues affect our personal and professional lives. Listeners, every one of us can think of people around us who suffer from lack of confidence. Many such people around me are highly educated and talented women, but at some point in their lives, they allowed negative feedback or situations to undermine their self esteem, and that has continued to affect their performance and success every day. After the first episode of my podcast, I was having a candid discussion with a group of people, and they asked me on how to overcome lack of confidence, particularly when you're a woman, since you're doing a podcast now. And it merged not just with the actual and basic concept of this podcast, which is communication, but also the topic of the second episode of this podcast, which was International Day of Rural Women. As we know, listeners, October 15th, which was last week, is the International Day of Rural Women and a chance to celebrate women and girls who play a key role in rural areas, enhancing agricultural development, building climate resilience, facing malnutrition, and food insecurity. The United Nations on this day, under the theme Rural Women Confront the Global Cost of Living Crisis, urges upon recognizing the work of these star women in the food systems of the world and claiming rural areas with equal opportunities for all. Listeners, despite being too often excluded from decisions and decision making that affect their lives, and despite being limited by unequal resource allocation, rural women are fundamental both within and outside their households. Paid or not, they undertake a wide range of tasks. They manage natural resources, adopt climate resilient agricultural approaches, preserve biodiversity, and agriculture productivity. Listeners, reinforcement of women's leadership at all levels, from the farm to farmers' associations to global farmers' forums, is much needed. We all need to be committed to foster rural women's participation and leadership in farmer and producer organizations and other decision making bodies as well. There is also a need to reinforce rural women's self confidence, knowledge, and skills, including technical leadership and managerial, and that is what would be making the difference. And not just rural women, women in general lack confidence in our society. So then I asked one of my friends if she could recall a time in her life when she was more confident, and she spoke at length about her wonderful childhood with her outstanding academic success. She said she always felt competent and able to tackle any situation at work. But then there was a specific incident that triggered her. Years ago, one of her bosses commented, "You're not as smart as you think you are." And that did it. That statement unlocked her deep seated fear that she wasn't smart enough or good enough to succeed. And you know, listeners, once a limiting belief is triggered and activated, your outlook changes. You see everything through a new filter. You look for validation daily that you aren't smart enough. And of course, you will always find something that confirms this belief. For example, someone offers a different opinion than yours in a meeting. Instead of acknowledging the comment or being open to discussing it, you remain silent or immediately get defensive and start beating yourself up. Why didn't I think of that? Obviously, I'm not smart enough. This is just one example, listeners. But I've seen this over and over again with people around me, particularly women. Their lack of confidence affects their ability to reach their full potential. Whether perfectionism or the imposter syndrome is the cause, the negative self talk erodes their confidence as they look for proof that they will ultimately not succeed. It is a self fulfilling prophecy, maybe. But the good part is that we can rewire our brain and focus with focus and intention, basically. And although our fears and limiting beliefs won't completely disappear, over time they lose their power over our daily thoughts and actions. Practicing mindfulness, listeners, and meditation also supports building new neural pathways, and consistent positive thinking and self talk do the rest of the magic. And so later, I asked a number of people how would their life be different if they were more confident. And one of the responses that I really liked was, if I were more confident, I would be happier and my relationships would be healthier. Listeners, low self esteem can lead to depression. A negative mindset undermines your success and also your relationships as you don't show up as the best version of yourself. In some cases, you may not even know what the best self looks like. You tolerate toxic relationships too long and not stand up for yourself when appropriate. And another respondent said, I wouldn't be consumed by the thought that everyone else is smarter and more successful than I, or view this success as a mark against my self worth. Very deep. Because when you lack confidence, you spend more time thinking and worrying about what other people are doing than focusing on your own competence and potential. This focus on others robs you of the positive energy you need to fuel your ambition and reach your objectives. The external focus validates that you're not good enough or smart enough to succeed. And another response was, I would allow myself to make mistakes and learn lessons from them. Very interesting, though. Listeners, in order to grow personally and professionally, you need to be willing to take some risks and make mistakes. You can start small with something that has little risk and start to build this muscle and gradually take on more risk. Be curious and expand your horizon. And another person said, I would be in a role I enjoy, doing the work I enjoy, and growing in my profession. Certainly, a lack of confidence can have a dramatic effect on your career. It will keep you in your comfort zone because that's where you feel safe with little risk of failure. And this prevents you from leaving a bad work situation or applying for a new position, maybe. You risk losing your motivation and it undermines your self esteem over time. And someone said, I would ask questions, listen, and respond in an objective manner. Because I'm worried I won't say the right thing, I say nothing. Exactly that happens when you lack confidence. Lack of confidence holds you back, listeners, from speaking up in meetings and voicing your opinion. How many times have you literally said to yourself, that person said what I was going to say? But you didn't open your mouth, and so no one knows how you think and what you have to offer. You run the risk of being invisible, which can be damaging to your career. You would be overlooked when it comes to promotions, raises, or special assignments. And then somebody said, I would be less defensive and more open to receiving constructive feedback. In fact, I would ask for it on a regular basis. No successful career listeners was ever built in a vacuum. You need to get regular feedback on your work, not only for validation that you're on the right path, but so that you get an objective point of view and learn how to improve your performance. And the best response for me mentioned communication. It said, I would be clear and direct in my communication and not use minimizing language or find ways to soften my statements. Very, very interesting and amazing response. A lack of confidence, listeners, makes it difficult to communicate assertively. You end your sentences with a question, maybe. You use qualifying words such as kind of, sort of, which minimize the effect of what you're attempting to say. Your discomfort with assertive communication leads you to talk too much after making a strong statement instead of remaining quiet and waiting for input from others. The lack of conviction leads others to question your thinking and contributes to their perception that you're not a valued contributor. In fact, they may see you as a weak player. Listeners, can you relate to any of these statements that I've mentioned? In fact, do let us know how would you answer the question. If I were more confident, how would my life and career be different? For example, I strongly believe that behind any successful and confident woman is usually a progressive man, particularly in our society. For example, I have derived a lot of my strength from my father and my brother and my husband. So, do give us your feedback on today's podcast. I would be waiting for your comments and suggestions, and do reach out if you would like to be a part of this podcast. Bye bye. Take care.